The cursor blinked on the screen, mocking me. I stared at the numbers, or rather, the lack of numbers, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Our joint account, the one we'd painstakingly built up over the past 2 years, the one earmarked for our wedding, was empty. Just a few hours ago, I'd been buzzing with excitement. I had an appointment with the venue tomorrow, the Willow Creek Estate, the one Emily had fallen in love with. We were going to finalize the booking, put down the deposit, make it official. It was supposed to be one of the happiest days of our lives. Now, staring at the near-zero balance on the screen, I felt a cold dread creeping into my heart. This had to be a mistake, a bank error, a glitch in the system. It had to be. I clicked on the transaction history, scrolling through the recent activity. There it was. A single, massive withdrawal, made just yesterday. The description: transfer to B&B bail bonds. Bail bonds? What the? My hands started to shake. I grabbed my phone, dialing the bank's customer service number, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hi, I'm calling to inquire about a transaction on my account," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It looks like there's been a large withdrawal, and I don't recognize it." The automated system put me on hold, the generic elevator music a jarring contrast to the turmoil raging inside me. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, a human voice. "This is Sarah. How can I help you?" I explained the situation again, my voice cracking with a mixture of anxiety and disbelief. "Let me just pull up your account details, sir," Sarah said, her voice professionally neutral. "Okay, I see the transaction you're referring to. It was a wire transfer initiated yesterday to B&B bail bonds." "Yes, but I didn't authorize that," I insisted. "It must be a mistake, a fraud." There was a pause, a shuffling of papers, the clicking of a keyboard. "I'm showing here that the transfer was authorized by Emily Dawson. Is that correct, sir?" Emily, my fiancée. The woman I was going to marry. The blood drained from my face. The room started to spin. "Sir, are you still there?" "Yes," I managed to croak out. "Yes, I'll have to call you back." I hung up, my hand trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone. Bail bonds, Emily? It couldn't be. It couldn't be. And then I remembered. Ryan. Her ex-boyfriend. The one she'd sworn was out of her life. The one she'd described as toxic, manipulative, a mistake she'd made in her past. He'd been arrested last week for some kind of... what was it? Drug possession, I think. Emily had mentioned it, casually, dismissively. But it wasn't casual, it wasn't dismissive, it was... everything. The pieces clicked together, forming a horrifying, sickening picture. Emily had used our money, our wedding fund, to bail out her ex-boyfriend. The man she'd claimed to despise. The man she'd promised she was over. She'd betrayed me. She'd lied to me. She'd stolen from me, and she hadn't even bothered to hide it. I waited for her. Hours passed. Each tick of the clock a hammer blow to my shattered illusions. I didn't move, didn't eat, didn't drink. I just sat there, on the sofa, staring at the blank screen of the television, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of anger, disbelief, and a growing, gnawing sense of emptiness. I replayed our 4 years together, searching for clues, for signs, for anything I'd missed. Had she always been like this? Had I been blind, naive, a willing participant in my own deception? The memories, once cherished, now felt tainted, poisoned. The laughter, the kisses, the promises. All lies. All part of a carefully constructed facade. She finally came home, late, her footsteps hesitant on the stairs. She walked into the living room, her expression normal, as if nothing had happened, as if our world hadn't just imploded. "Hey," she said, her voice light, casual. "Sorry I'm late. I had to..." She stopped, noticing my expression, the stillness in my posture, the cold, hard emptiness in my eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked, a flicker of concern crossing her face. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I simply laid out the facts, my voice calm, almost detached. "I checked the account, Emily," I said. "The wedding fund, it's gone." She didn't even flinch. She didn't look surprised or guilty or ashamed, just resigned. "I can explain," she started, but I cut her off. "The bank confirmed the transfer," I continued, my voice a monotone, "to B&B bail bonds for Ryan's bail." Her silence was a confession, a damning, heartbreaking confession. "I had to help him, Jack," she finally said, her voice small, almost pleading. "He was in trouble. He needed me." "He needed you?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly, the first crack in my carefully constructed composure. "He needed our money? Our future?" "It's not like that," she protested, but her words were weak, unconvincing. "I'll pay it back, I promise. It's just a loan." A loan? She thought this was a loan? She'd emptied our joint account, the money we'd saved for our wedding, to bail out her ex-boyfriend, a man she'd claimed to hate, and she called it a loan? "You wouldn't understand, Jack," she continued, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "Ryan, he's had a hard life. He's made mistakes. But he's a good person deep down." Her words were like knives, twisting in my gut. She was defending him, justifying her actions, making me feel like I was the one in the wrong. "A good person?" I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "He's a criminal, Emily, a drug addict, and you chose him over me, over us." She didn't answer. She just stood there, looking at me, her eyes filled with, what, pity, contempt? I couldn't tell, and I didn't care. Something inside me had snapped. The love, the trust, the hope. It was all gone, replaced by a cold, hard emptiness. A void where my heart used to be. I didn't want to hear her excuses, her justifications, her lies. I didn't want to see her face, hear her voice, breathe the same air as her. I stood up slowly, deliberately, and walked towards the door. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice panicked. I didn't answer. I just walked out, closing the door softly behind me, leaving her standing there, alone, in the wreckage of our life together. The city streets were a blur. I walked for hours, aimlessly, lost in a fog of grief and rage. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. It wasn't just the money, it wasn't just the wedding, it was the trust. The absolute, unwavering trust I'd placed in Emily shattered into a million irreparable pieces. I replayed our years together, searching for answers, for explanations, for any sign that I'd been a fool all along. Had she ever loved me? Had any of it been real? Or had it all been a lie, a carefully constructed performance designed to exploit my trust, my generosity, my love? I remembered the sacrifices I'd made, the late nights at work, the promotions I'd turned down to spend more time with her, the dreams I'd put on hold to support her dreams. I'd given her everything, my heart, my soul, my future, and she'd thrown it all away. For him. The anger was a burning fire in my gut, a consuming rage that threatened to overwhelm me. I wanted to scream, to shout, to lash out, to destroy something. But I didn't. I kept it all inside, bottled up, contained. I found myself in a dingy bar, the kind of place I'd usually avoid. I ordered a whiskey, then another and another, the alcohol numbing the pain but amplifying the anger. I thought about confronting them, about making them pay, about exposing their lies, about ruining their lives. But the thought of seeing them, of hearing their voices, of being in the same room with them, it was too much. I was a coward. A broken, pathetic coward. But then, as the alcohol haze began to clear, a new feeling emerged, a cold, hard resolve, a sense of purpose. I wouldn't be a victim. I wouldn't wallow in self-pity. I wouldn't let them win. I would get revenge. Not the messy, emotional, impulsive kind of revenge. No, this would be something different, something calculated, something devastating. I would use their own tactics against them. I would lie, I would manipulate, I would deceive. I would play the long game, and I would make them suffer. Slowly, methodically, completely. I wouldn't yell, I wouldn't scream, I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't even look angry. I would smile. I would be calm. I would be patient. And I would destroy them. I finished my drink, the ice clinking against the glass, a sharp, decisive sound. The decision was made. The plan was forming. The old Nate, the loving, trusting, forgiving Nate, was gone. He'd died in that hospital bed, a victim of his own naivete. And in his place, a new man had been born, a man forged in the fires of betrayal, fueled by a burning desire for revenge, a man who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. A monster. I stood up, leaving the bar, stepping out into the night. The rain had stopped, and the city lights glittered, cold and indifferent. I had a lot of work to do, and I was going to enjoy every single second of it. Returning to the apartment felt like stepping onto a stage. The set was familiar, our furniture, our photos, our life together. But the script had been irrevocably rewritten. I was no longer the loving fiancé, the trusting partner. I was an actor, playing a role, and my performance had to be flawless. Emily was waiting for me, her posture tense, her eyes red and swollen. She'd clearly been expecting a confrontation, a shouting match, a dramatic display of anger and heartbreak. She was prepared for the old Nate, the one who wore his emotions on his sleeve. She wasn't prepared for this. I walked in calmly and hung up my coat. I didn't say a word. I didn't even look at her. I simply went about my routine as if nothing had happened, as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. "Jack?" she said, her voice hesitant, uncertain. "Are you okay?" I turned to her, a polite, slightly distant smile on my face. "Of course, Emily," I replied, my voice even. "Why wouldn't I be?" My calmness unnerved her. It was the opposite of what she'd expected, what she'd prepared for. She was expecting a fight, a release, a chance to justify her actions, to shift the blame. I gave her nothing. "But the money," she stammered. "Ryan, It's your money, Emily," I said, cutting her off, my voice still calm, almost gentle. "You're free to do with it as you please." "Your money?" My internal voice was screaming. "Our money! The money we saved for our wedding! The money you stole to bail out your scumbag ex-boyfriend!" But on the surface, I remained impassive, a mask of polite indifference. I know I should have talked to you first," she continued, her voice wavering. "But it was an emergency. Ryan, he needed help. I couldn't just—" "I understand," I interrupted, again, my voice soothing. "Family is important. You did what you thought was right." "Family?" My internal voice was a snarl. "He's not family, Emily. He's the man you cheated on me with, the man you chose over me, the man you're about to regret ever meeting." The silence stretched, thick with unspoken accusations, with unexpressed emotions. Emily was visibly confused, agitated. She was used to my reactions, my outbursts, my emotional vulnerability. My calmness, my detachment, was throwing her off balance. "I'm going to make some tea," I said, breaking the silence. "Would you like a cup?" It was a mundane, ordinary question, but in this context, it was a power play. It was a way of asserting control, of demonstrating that I was unfazed, unaffected by her betrayal, that I was in command now. Sure, she replied, her voice uncertain. I went into the kitchen, moving slowly, deliberately, letting her stew in her confusion, her guilt, her growing unease. I could hear her thoughts, a jumble of anxieties and self-justifications. He's acting so strange. Is he in shock? Is he planning something? I need to figure out what he's thinking. As I prepared the tea, my internal monologue was a stark contrast to the calm, almost robotic movements. I hate you. I hate the sight of you. I wish you were dead. She tried, again, to explain, to apologize, to justify. Jack, I know this looks bad, she said, her voice pleading. But I promise, it's not what you think. Ryan and we're just friends. He was in a bad place and It's fine, Emily, I interrupted, my voice flat. Really, I'm not upset. Liar, my internal voice screamed. I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to make you suffer. I'm going to make you regret the day you ever met me. I handed her a cup of tea, my hand steady, my smile unwavering. Let's not talk about it anymore, I said. Let's just move on. And then, to add a touch of normalcy, of the old Nate, I turned on the TV, flipping through the channels. Anything you want to watch? I asked, my voice utterly devoid of any emotion. I talked about the weather. Seems like we're going to get more rain tomorrow. I talked about work. The project is moving along. I may be up for a promotion soon. It was all an act, a carefully constructed performance designed to lull her into a false sense of security, to make her believe that I was still the same naive, forgiving fool she'd always known. But inside, the gears were turning. The plan was taking shape. And the monster was growing stronger. She had no idea what was coming, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The next phase of my plan involved a campaign of subtle sabotage, a campaign of whispers and lies designed to tarnish Emily's reputation, to isolate her, to make her question her own sanity. I started with our mutual friends and family. I knew they all liked Emily, admired her, saw her as the perfect girlfriend, the ideal daughter-in-law. I needed to change that perception, to plant seeds of doubt, to make them question her character, her motives, her loyalty. I began with subtle hints, casual remarks, carefully worded suggestions. I'd accidentally mentioned seeing Emily and Ryan together before his arrest during a casual conversation with her sister, Sarah. It's funny, I said, shaking my head, a bewildered expression on my face. I could have sworn I saw Emily with Ryan a few weeks ago, downtown. They were laughing. Having lunch, I think. I just assumed they were catching up. Sarah, of course, was immediately suspicious. She knew about Ryan, about Emily's supposed toxic past with him. Really? She said, her eyebrows raised. That's strange. Emily told me she hadn't seen him in years. Maybe I was mistaken, I said, shrugging. It was just a quick glimpse, but I don't know, it just seemed odd. I planted the seed, and I let it grow. I knew Sarah would talk, would gossip, would spread the doubt to others. I used social media to my advantage, posting cryptic messages, vague status updates that hinted at betrayal and deception. Some people are not who they seem to be. Trust is a fragile thing. Once broken, it can never be fully restored. The truth always comes out, eventually. These messages were ambiguous enough to avoid direct accusation, but they were also suggestive enough to raise eyebrows, to spark speculation, to create a cloud of suspicion around Emily. I knew she would see them, of course, and I knew they would eat at her, fueling her paranoia, her insecurity, her growing sense of isolation. And I was right. She started to receive concerned messages from friends, awkward questions from family members. People were looking at her differently, talking about her behind her back, questioning her motives, her character. "What's going on, Jack?" she asked me one evening, her voice tight with anxiety. "People are acting strange. They're saying things about me and Ryan, about us." "I don't know, Emily," I replied, my voice carefully neutral. "Maybe you should talk to them. Clear the air." "He knows. He has to know. He's playing with me." Her thoughts were a tangled mess. I was enjoying this, I realized, with a chilling detachment. I was enjoying watching her squirm, seeing her panic, witnessing the slow, steady erosion of her carefully constructed facade. I was a puppeteer, pulling the strings, manipulating the narrative, orchestrating her downfall. And she, my once beloved Emily, was just a puppet, dancing to my tune, oblivious to the trap I was setting. With Emily's reputation slowly but surely crumbling, I turned my attention to Ryan. He was the loose cannon, the weak link, the one most likely to crack under pressure. And I intended to apply a lot of pressure. First, I needed to know more about him, more than just the toxic ex narrative Emily had spun. I needed to understand his weaknesses, his vulnerabilities, his criminal connections. So I hired a private investigator. Not a flashy, high-profile PI, but a discreet, unassuming man who specialized in digging up dirt, in uncovering secrets, in finding the skeletons hidden in people's closets. "I need to know everything about this man," I told the PI, handing him a photo of Ryan. His past, his present, his finances, his associates, everything. The PI, a man named Miller, just nodded, his expression unreadable. "Discretion guaranteed, Mr. Carter," he said. "I'll get you what you need." And he did. Within a week, Miller delivered a comprehensive report on Ryan, a dossier filled with damning information. Drug use, petty theft, assault charges, unpaid debts, a string of broken relationships. Ryan was a mess, a walking disaster, a man with a long history of bad choices and even worse consequences. But there was more. Miller had uncovered evidence of Ryan's involvement in a larger criminal enterprise, a network of drug dealers, money launderers, and violent thugs. Ryan was small-time, a pawn in a much bigger game, but he was connected. And that was exactly what I needed. I started by subtly sabotaging Ryan's already precarious life. I used my mind reading to anticipate his movements, to interfere with his deals, to create problems for him. I made sure a drug shipment he was expecting was intercepted by the police, an anonymous tip, of course. I accidentally revealed his gambling debts to a particularly unsavory loan shark. I even managed to get him fired from his dead-end job by planting a few carefully chosen words in his boss's mind. Ryan, already on edge, started to unravel. He was paranoid, desperate, and increasingly reliant on Emily for money, for support, for everything. And Emily, already struggling with her own crumbling reputation, was reaching her breaking point. She'd bailed him out again, of course, draining her own savings, putting herself further into debt, all for a man who was clearly dragging her down with him, but this time it was different. This time Ryan wasn't grateful. He was resentful. He blamed Emily for his troubles, for his failures, for his increasingly desperate situation. "You got me into this mess," he screamed at her during one of their increasingly frequent arguments. "You and your stupid ex. You ruined my life." Their relationship, already strained, was now on the verge of collapse. They were trapped in a cycle of anger, resentment, and mutual recrimination. And I was watching it all, listening to their thoughts, pulling the strings, orchestrating their downfall. I was the ghost in their machine, the unseen hand, the architect of their destruction. And I was just getting started. The time had come for the final act, the culmination of months of planning, of subtle manipulation, of carefully orchestrated chaos. It was time to expose Emily, to strip her of everything she held dear, to make her feel the same pain, the same humiliation, the same utter despair that she had inflicted upon me. My first step was to ensure that everyone, our mutual friends, her family, her colleagues, knew the truth about what she had done. Not just the vague rumors and whispers I'd been spreading, but the cold, hard, undeniable facts. I compiled all the evidence I'd gathered. The bank statements showing the transfer to the bail bondsman, the screenshots of her text messages with Ryan, obtained, of course, through unconventional means, the fabricated financial report I'd used to plant doubt in her mind about Victor, and even audio recordings I'd subtly captured of her conversations, highlighting her manipulative nature and her disdain for me. I created an anonymous email account, a burner address that couldn't be traced back to me. And then I sent the evidence. To everyone. I crafted the email carefully, presenting the information in a clear, concise, and utterly damning manner. I let the evidence speak for itself, adding only a few carefully chosen words to amplify the impact. Subject: the truth about Emily Dawson. Attached are documents and recordings that reveal the true character of Emily Dawson. She betrayed the man who loved her, stole his money, and lied to everyone. Judge for yourselves. I hit send, and the email went out. A digital bomb detonating in the lives of everyone who knew Emily. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Her friends, shocked and disgusted, turned on her. Her family, heartbroken and ashamed, distanced themselves. Her social media accounts were flooded with hateful messages, accusations, and condemnations. Her reputation, her carefully constructed image of the perfect, successful, loving woman, was shattered, irreparably. She lost her job, of course. The scandal was too big, too public for her company to ignore. She was branded a thief, a liar, a manipulator, a pariah. She tried to deny it, to explain, to justify her actions, but it was useless. The evidence was overwhelming, the condemnation universal. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a ghost in the machine, observing the destruction I'd wrought. There was a sense of satisfaction, yes, but it was a cold, hollow satisfaction, tinged with a lingering sadness. I'd wanted revenge, I'd gotten it, but it hadn't brought me the peace I'd craved. It hadn't erased the pain, the betrayal, the loss, but it was done. Emily was ruined, financially, socially, emotionally. She was alone, isolated, stripped of everything she valued. And now it was time for the final act, the final confrontation, the final crushing blow. With Emily's world collapsing around her, Ryan was a rat deserting a sinking ship. He'd been using her, of course, exploiting her desperation, her lingering feelings for him, her willingness to sacrifice everything for his sake. But now, with Emily broke, disgraced, and facing potential criminal charges, Ryan saw no further use for her. He was a parasite, and his host had been bled dry. I'd made sure, through my usual subtle manipulations, that Ryan's own financial situation was precarious. The debts I'd saddled him with, the legal troubles I'd orchestrated, the loss of his criminal connections. He was desperate, scrambling to stay afloat. He had nothing to offer Emily. No money, no support, no love. Just empty promises and a trail of broken lives. Their arguments became more frequent, more vicious, fueled by desperation, resentment, and the bitter realization that they'd both been played. "You ruined my life, Emily!" Ryan screamed at her during one particularly brutal fight, a fight I overheard thanks to a strategically placed listening device. "You and your stupid ex, you dragged me down with you." "I did everything for you, Ryan," she shrieked back. "I sacrificed everything, and this is how you repay me?" Sacrificed? He scoffed. You threw away a fortune, a future, for me? You're delusional, Emily. You did it for yourself. You always do. He walked out, slamming the door behind him, leaving Emily alone in the wreckage of their toxic relationship. It was the final nail in the coffin, the final betrayal. And I was there, a silent witness, listening to their thoughts, savoring their despair. She's nothing to me now, a liability. I have to get away from her. Ryan's thoughts were cold, calculating, devoid of any remorse. He used me, he lied to me, they all lied to me. Emily's thoughts were a jumble of pain, confusion, and a growing, terrifying sense of isolation. She was at rock bottom, broken, alone, and utterly, completely ruined. And it was all thanks to me. It was time for checkmate. I arranged the meeting, sending her a simple text message. Meet me, our old apartment, tonight, 8 p.m. I knew she would come. She had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. She was desperate, clinging to the faint hope that I, the man she'd betrayed, would somehow offer her salvation. The apartment was empty, stripped bare of all furniture, all memories, all traces of our former life together. It was a fitting setting for our final confrontation, a symbolic representation of the emptiness she'd created, the void she'd left in my life. I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, waiting for her. I heard the door open, the hesitant footsteps, the catch in her breath as she saw me. "Jack," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I turned to face her. She looked terrible. Haggard, defeated, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. "You wanted to see me," I said, my voice cold, devoid of any emotion. I had to talk to you," she stammered. To explain, to apologize." She walked towards me, slowly, hesitantly, her hands outstretched, as if pleading for forgiveness. "I made a mistake, Jack," she said, her voice trembling. "A terrible mistake. I was confused. I was manipulated. I didn't know what I was doing." She started to cry, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking with sobs. "I lost everything, Jack. My friends, my family, my job, my reputation, everything." She reached for me, her fingers brushing against my arm. I flinched, recoiling from her touch as if she were a poisonous snake. "I know I hurt you, Jack," she continued, her voice choked with emotion. "I know I betrayed you, but I still love you. I always have. Please, please take me back. Give me another chance." The words hung in the air, a desperate, pathetic plea, and I heard the truth, the raw, unfiltered truth echoing in her mind. I need him. I need his money, his connections, his forgiveness. I can manipulate him. I can make him believe me. I have to. I looked at her, really looked at her, seeing her not as the woman I'd once loved, but as the monster she truly was. A selfish, manipulative, heartless creature, driven by greed and ambition, willing to destroy anyone who stood in her way. "You don't love me, Madison," I said, my voice a low, chilling whisper. "You never did. You love what I can provide for you. You love the security, the status, the money." Her eyes widened in shock, in fear, in a dawning realization that her game was over. How did you know?" she stammered. "I know everything, Madison," I said, my voice taking on a harder edge. "I know about Ryan, about the embezzlement, about the lies, about the betrayal. I know it all." I stepped closer, my face inches from hers, letting her see the cold, hard fury in my eyes. "I know that you framed me, that you stole my company, that you left me to rot in prison. I know that you watched, with a smile on your face, as my life was destroyed." She tried to speak, to deny it, to beg, to plead, but I cut her off. "And I know," I continued, my voice a venomous hiss, that you're only here because you have nowhere else to go, because you're desperate, because you think you can manipulate me again. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. But you're wrong, Madison. You were always wrong about me. I'm not the man you thought I was. I'm not the fool you took me for. I paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air, letting the truth sink in. You chose him over me, Madison, I said, my voice filled with a cold finality. And look where it got you. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, alone in the empty apartment, the ruins of her life collapsing around her. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I'd had my revenge, and it was complete. The first step was to disappear, not in a dramatic, vanishing into thin air way, but a gradual, methodical fading away. Nathaniel Holloway, the wronged and broken man, needed to cease to exist. He was a ghost, and it was time to fully embrace that spectral existence. I started by severing all remaining ties. I resigned from my old job, a formality, really, since the company I'd returned to was now a shell of its former self, thanks to my manipulations. I sold the apartment, the one that had once been our home, the scene of both my greatest happiness and my ultimate betrayal. I didn't want any reminders, any lingering connections to that life. There were a few loose ends, a few people who knew something, who might potentially connect the dots between the old Nate and the new me. I dealt with them carefully. Not through violence, not directly. I was more subtle than that. A whispered rumor here, a misplaced document there, a strategically timed phone call. I made sure they were discredited, silenced, or simply redirected. Emily, of course, was the biggest loose end, but she was also the easiest to handle. She was already broken, disgraced, alone. She posed no threat to me. In fact, her continued existence, her miserable, ruined life, was a more fitting punishment than anything I could have actively inflicted upon her. Still, I took precautions. I made sure her name was erased from my history, from my records, from my life. I scrubbed her from the internet, from social media, from any database I could access. She became a ghost, a phantom, a cautionary tale whispered in the corridors of power. I needed a clean slate, a new identity, a fresh start. I'd already laid the groundwork for this, of course, during my 6 years of planning. I had a new name, a new passport, a new life waiting for me. The city held too many memories, too many ghosts. I needed distance, anonymity, a place where I could reinvent myself, where I could escape the shadow of my past. I chose a different coast, a different climate, a different world, a place where no one knew my name, where no one knew my story, where I could be anyone. The physical act of leaving was surprisingly easy. I packed a single suitcase, discarding anything that reminded me of my former life. I walked out of the apartment, empty now, devoid of any trace of Nathaniel Holloway or Emily Dawson, and I didn't look back. But the emotional baggage, that was harder to shed. The memories, the anger, the betrayal, they lingered, a constant undercurrent beneath the surface of my new life. I was free, yes, but I was also changed, scarred. I would never be the same man I was before. My new life was different. Successful, certainly. I used my mind-reading ability, discreetly, strategically, to build a new career, a new fortune, a new identity. I was careful, though, never drawing too much attention to myself, never letting my power become obvious. I was respected, admired, even feared in certain circles. But I was also alone. I'd built walls around myself, impenetrable barriers of secrecy and control. I couldn't trust anyone, not completely. My ability, my curse, made intimacy impossible. I could always hear the lies, the doubts, the hidden agendas. I was living a paradox. I was surrounded by people, yet utterly isolated. I was powerful, yet vulnerable. I was free, yet imprisoned by my past. I reflected on my journey, on the man I had been, the man I had become, and the price I had paid for my revenge. There was satisfaction, yes, a cold, hard sense of justice served. I'd destroyed my enemies, reclaimed my life, achieved a level of success I'd never dreamed possible. But there was also emptiness, a hollowness that echoed in the silence of my luxurious but lonely apartment. I'd embraced the darkness, used it as a weapon, and in doing so, I'd lost something precious, something irretrievable. I'd become a master manipulator, a liar, a schemer. I'd become, in many ways, like the people I'd despised, the people I'd sought to destroy. Was it worth it? The question haunted me, a constant whisper in the back of my mind. I'd gotten my revenge, but at what cost? I knew deep down that I would never fully escape the shadow of my past. The memories of Emily, of Victor, of the betrayal would always be there, a constant reminder of what I'd lost and what I'd become. But I'd also learned a valuable lesson. I'd learned that trust is a fragile thing, that love can be a lie, that power can corrupt. I'd learned that the world is a dangerous place, filled with predators and prey. And I'd learned that I was no longer prey. I was a survivor, a warrior, a man reborn from the ashes of his former life. The ending was open, ambiguous. I had a future, a new life, a chance to build something different. But I also knew that I would always be looking over my shoulder, always anticipating the next threat, always guarding my secrets. I would never be naive again. I would never be vulnerable again. I would never be a victim again. I was Ethan now, not Nate. And I was ready for whatever the future held. I was stronger, more resilient, more ruthless. I was a force to be reckoned with. And as for Emily, she was a ghost, a memory, a lesson learned. I would never forgive her. I would never forget her. But I would no longer let her define me. My life was my own now, and I would live it on my own terms. Alone, perhaps. But always, always in control. And I felt like that was enough.